good afternoon, everyone. This is Dan Levine from Transportation for America. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. For this webinar, we're going to dive into a new resource that we have out and hear from two folks from two administrations talking about how they're making important transportation reforms. My name is Dan Levine. I'm a policy associate here, and I run our State Transportation Advocacy Research and Training Network. It's a network where we provide policy support for states, for legislators, for state and local officials, and for advocates to help increase transportation funding, ensure accountability, and empower local leaders. We've released a number of resources through our START network to help you in your campaigns and in your work in your states. Today we're really going to be focusing on this newest resource. It's really a guide for administrations, governors, political staff, leadership within departments of transportation, helping administrations and showing how to do more with the transportation program. Just a little bit of a guide to where we're going with this webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about this new resource, the guidebook that we have out. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have our two featured presenters say two examples of states that are really pointing the way on how to do important transportation reform, both in Washington and in Massachusetts. Then we'll hear a little bit more about trends nationwide in states that are doing this important work and how we can help and help to solve your problems through solve problems going on in your states through our technical assistance work. We'll have Q&A at the end, and that'll be a chance for you to ask questions of any of our speakers. Just a housekeeping note on that, you'll note that you're all listening, just in listening mode now. You'll be able to hear from the speakers. If you have questions, you can chat those in using the chat box at the bottom of your, or the side of your webinar window. That's where we'll be taking questions throughout the program, and especially at the end. We'll take questions in for Q&A, and I'll be reading those out. So I want to jump into what this report and this webinar are all about. Our new guide, Transportation Innovations That Save States Money and Attract Talent. It's really all about how state transportation programs can do more. Governors, state leadership, legislators were elected on promises that they would support economic development in their state, run an efficient government, support the health and welfare of all the citizens and residents in their state, and govern efficiently. And transportation programs in the state really have a very important role to play in that. And that's one of the things we highlight in this resource. Just to give you an idea of one specific way that this has become important, you know, the recipe for economic development in your state, in your region, in your city has changed quite a bit. What we found and what our partners at Smart Growth America have found through quite a bit of recent research is that really, you know, the importance of quality places and of building places that will attract talented workers is really becoming the key to economic development. That has a huge importance for transportation as well. It's not enough to just build a new highway or build access to a site and call that economic development, but really transportation programs at the state and local level need to support these types of quality places that can attract talent. Unfortunately, in many states, state transportation programs are really falling short of those needs and those goals. We outline in this new resource that there are problems, including poor coordination between the state and other levels of government. There's too much of a focus and too much spending on mega projects and not enough on basic maintenance, repair, and some of the most efficient smaller projects. And in many places, designs are not meeting the local needs, or in some cases, transportation priorities and transportation programs aren't lining up with other goals of the state. States really can do more and can save money by reforming these programs, by lining up their transportation goals and programs and spending with other priorities across state government. And that's really the way that states can be effective. One of the good pieces of news here is that while state programs may not be meeting the full need, states really have a lot of power to change this. States are in a position, state governments are in a position to make a lot of the most important decisions on transportation. in terms of what projects are built where, what types of spending. Even, as we here in Washington are hearing, new discussions at the federal level about maybe, a major new infrastructure package and what types of projects that might fund. And that is important for us to watch. It's also important for everyone to keep in mind that, we have a federal transportation spending bill already in law, the FAST Act. It's going to run through 2020 and give each of your states hundreds of millions of dollars every year from the federal government going directly to states with ultimately very few strings attached. It's flexible money that your state can use for the most important transportation investments. And that means it's really incumbent on state policymakers, on governors, on departments of transportation to make sure that those funds are well spent and that transportation programs and transportation agencies are aligned to do the most with that money. With that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to our two featured speakers. And first, we'll be hearing from Kate Fichter. She's the Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And she will have some examples from the work that's going on in Massachusetts.
Hi, thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. As Dan said, my name is Kate Fichter, and I am the Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination here at Mass DOT. I am really happy to be speaking with you all today, and let me give you a round of applause for participating in a webinar on a Friday afternoon. I think many of the things that Dan touched upon are things that we've been really focused on here at Mass DOT over the past several years with increasing acceleration really probably for the last 2 years. But if we could just back up a little bit, in 2009, our legislature passed a bill which led to a major consolidation of our transportation agencies. They had been quite autonomous previously, and it really brought them together. It wasn't a perfect, seamless merger, and we have continued to work through some of the bumps that have come out of it. But it was really a major investment of kind of public and legislative focus on making the transportation agencies work better, more effectively, in a more modern way. Since that time, we've had a couple of big initiatives that I think might be of interest to this audience. The first is what we call our Project Selection Advisory Committee. This, again, was an initiative of the legislature, although certainly it was something that the executive and the agencies had also been pushing for a long time. It created an external group of sort of well-known thinkers from around Massachusetts who've been focused on transportation, and they worked for about a year, I think, actually, maybe a little bit more, to develop recommendations for how the agency could best try to evaluate the project ideas that were before it. Again, it wasn't completely perfect. It was a first effort. That finished up probably about 18 months ago, and since that time, we've been investing a huge amount of energy into redoing our entire capital planning process, really trying to use the idea of evaluation criteria at the outset to help us pick our projects. If it's not possible to pick projects, we also use evaluation criteria to pick programs out of which projects come, and then to assign funding levels to those programs. And then certainly in the Q&A portion, if people are interested in discussing more about the difference between doing funding allocations at the program level and at the project level, I would be happy to talk about that, because that's a big part of this whole topic. What we see as kind of the next big step in project prioritization and project selection is going through a process of setting targets, targets for the performance of our different asset classes. Because ultimately, if you really want to do a capital plan that is based on allocated funding levels for different types of infrastructure, you need to know what your goals are for those pieces of infrastructure. What do you want your pavement quality to be? How many functionally obsolete bridges are you willing to tolerate? How do you want your public transportation system to function, or your marine transportation system to function? So without some sort of outcome goal, it's very hard to know how much funding to assign, because you don't even know what you're trying to shoot at. So right now we're in the process of creating those metrics. by asset class, and it's an ongoing process, but we've made a lot of progress over the last couple of years. So we're holding questions to the end, Dan. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So some of the other things we have done, stepping back from sort of more macro level programming, we've also had a couple of big projects we call our mega projects, run into big problems, either big cost overruns or other similar type trouble. And we have sort of created a structured diagnostic process that we can use here to try to analyze and understand the projects that frequently plague large transportation infrastructure projects. I think probably everybody on this call has some familiarity with those types of problems. And it has helped us both not have to cancel projects that that we continue to believe are very valuable and offer a lot of public benefits, but also try to right-size the costs, right-size the design, bring them back more into a budget that's reasonable for the agency, and to do so in a way that incorporates a lot of different voices from within the transportation agencies, as well to some extent with external stakeholders. So these processes for us have kind of led to an overall thinking about not just what's our output, not just what are the projects that we put out every spring and what are the things that people see us doing and what are our funding programs, but actually how do we work as an agency and trying to improve our own internal processes. And we've done a lot with some really skilled consultants who've been very helpful, have spent a lot of time mapping our processes, figuring out where inefficiencies have crept in over the years, where we're continuing to use systems that might be archaic or no longer really responsive to today's needs. And we've got, so at this point we're doing sort of continuous process improvement throughout the agency in different places pretty much all time. And we've trained staff to be able to do that. So it's very much an ongoing process, and we have a lot that we still need to learn, a lot that we still need to do better. And I can certainly talk in more detail if people would like me to during the questions. But it's a really exciting time here in Massachusetts, and I feel like we're doing some work that's really helping us to provide a better quality of service to the traveling public here and to our other stakeholders. So I'll be happy to answer more questions if they come up.
Thank you, Kate. This is Dan, and just a reminder to folks, if you do have questions or want to hear more about any of this, and I'm excited to hear more too, you can use that chat box on the side of your webinar window. Let us know what you're interested in hearing more about, and I will ask those questions after we bring up our next speakers. But next I'd like to turn it over to Charles Knudsen from Washington State. Charles is a senior advisor to Governor Jay Inslee in Washington. Will tell us a little bit about what's going on in Washington, and especially how they helped to pass a major new multimodal funding package last year. Charles?
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Dan, and it's great to be a part of this conversation, coming to you from the other Washington, the fun Washington, right? And love the fact that you've put this together from Transportation for America's standpoint, and that all of you are joining in this call. Infrastructure is definitely a hot topic right now in D.C., but regardless of what happens there or what doesn't happen, I agree, Dan, that states and local jurisdictions are really a great place for having impact and helping move transportation in a new direction, and that's what we've been trying to do in our state. I thought I'd talk about at a state level how we got a transportation package on the front burner and across the finish line last summer. So our governor could sign that into law. It was the largest and greenest transportation package in our state's history. But in addition to talking about how we got the money, I want to talk about how we made sure it was multimodal and balanced with local options for cities and regions, and also talk about how we used that process to embrace practical design to better match community needs, build more cost-effective projects. So I think the starting point here of the conversation, how we actually got it on the front burner, how we got it across the finish line. If there was a secret sauce to that, it was vision, leadership, and compromise. So I'll just talk about a few of those. In the first place, it really took vision. It took literally on the governor's first day in office in his inaugural speech, he laid out a vision for infrastructure and made passing a balanced and multimodal transportation package a top priority for our state. But beyond that, he asked us all to think about our transportation system truly as a system and to transcend a lot of the age-old battles that we've had here. For us, it's east versus west. In your state, it might be north versus south. Similar kind of divisions exist around the country, urban versus rural, roads versus transit. He asked us to rise above that fray and think about this also as a bipartisan issue, that there's really no such thing as a Republican bridge or a Democratic road. Some of this is the nuts and bolts of actually doing basic government work. And he had run for office on a strong economy, on job growth for all. So this was a big part of that agenda for him. He talked about how investing in infrastructure is an adrenaline shot to the economy, our ability to attract talent. It's estimated that our package will create 200,000 jobs, and that's something that really everybody could get behind. And beyond that, he talked about safety, traffic relief, quality of life, a lot of the other benefits that come from a package. The second ingredient here was leadership. And so we couldn't just frame the issue. That wasn't enough. We had to sell it. And that required basically every opportunity that we had, whether it was rallies, press conferences, speeches, crisscrossing the state and doing listening tours, and growing a coalition of business, labor, and environmental stakeholders as we went along. I think leadership also meant truly listening to people. Just as an example, one fellow told us during this stakeholder process, he said his commute was so bad that he had listened through books on tape to the entire volume of Tolstoy's War and Peace. And that really brought it home that, okay, our traffic wasn't just bad, it was Russian literature bad. We had to do something about it. It was at a crisis point. So we also tried to earn trust and demonstrate a higher level of performance within government. When things counted most, our DOT was able to deliver. We had a bridge collapse on our interstate. You may have seen some of the pictures of that on CNN. It was on the Skagit River. This fortunately, no one was hurt, but it was really an opportunity for WashDOT to show its stuff, and they got that temporary bridge up in just 27 days, and it really helped folks believe in the department and see it as a place where you could invest. I think the third element to this was compromise, and which was some of the hardest part. Our Senate is controlled by a different party. They started as heck no on any kind of package. We worked with them. We stuck by our multimodal principles, but also showed a willingness to compromise and see the greater good. When negotiations stalled, we came forward with our own proposal. And in the last hours, in the last day of the vote, when the transit piece was at zero, the governor broke the impasse by giving up something very important to him, a low-carbon fuel standard proposal, which was an environmental policy. That was the catalyst that got the bills moving. So vision, leadership, compromise to get a package together. But it also took adding some new accountability measures like practical design and some advanced transportation solutions that weren't just considered policy add-ons. They became really just integrated into our approach on everything. And so I'll just say a few words about that. On the practical design side, that was really a signature policy for our Secretary of Transportation at the time, Lynn Peterson, who now happens to be on the team at Transportation for America. So you're the beneficiaries of Lynn's great work, Dan, and the credit really goes to her for creating a new, I would even say, revolutionary way at doing business in transportation. Before, we had relied too much on textbook standards, cookie cutter, mega interchanges. Sometimes it was almost as though money were no object. And by incorporating some performance-based practical design into our thinking, the new method is that each project will go through a very data-driven review. And that process means checking in to make sure that the project is actually meeting community needs, that it meets the system's needs. We ask ourselves, are we retaining the character of our cities and towns? Are we making them more walkable and more transit-friendly and more environmentally friendly, not less? Are we adding quality of place to these locations? Usually the answer that comes back is that we can bring these projects back to human scale. And through that process, we can save a lot of time and money. It doesn't always cost less, but most of the time it will save money. And I can give some examples of that maybe in Q&A, but one signature project, we were able to save $850 million. So both Democrats and Republicans could get behind that. For them, it even meant that their project might get funded sooner because it costs less and but retaining the same sort of functionality and safety. To add an extra incentive, we put into law that for every dollar that's saved through practical design, 50 cents would go back into the system to maintain what we've already got, and the other 50 cents would go into an unallocated account for future projects that we haven't yet thought of, because it's a 16-year package and there's no way to really identify all of the needs of the state in 2015. So that incentive helped boost our maintenance program, but it also helped every legislator and stakeholder to allow themselves to really see themselves in the package. Even if they didn't have a project now, that unallocated fund could take care of them later on. We also ensured that the package included more 21st century innovations. We created a very robust incentive package for electric vehicles with sales tax exemptions, more high-speed charging stations. We boosted our commute trip reduction program, more competitive grants for local jurisdictions. And now we're moving on to autonomous vehicles, ACEs, the convergence of technology, autonomous, connected, electric, shared, ultra high-speed rail. It's all very exciting stuff, all of it with the end goal in mind of making the transportation system operate even more efficiently. So, as I wrap up here, one thing to keep in mind is that doing this took us 3 years, but sticking with it pays off. When we first started our conversation, people were talking about a $10 billion package. What the governor ultimately signed into law was worth $70 billion of infrastructure. And $55 billion of that, almost 80%, is going towards multimodal and transit. So whether you're looking to secure additional funding or if you're just working to transform your system from within, all of that time and energy and sweat can pay off in a big way, and I encourage you to keep at it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. We'll be taking questions, as I said, for both of our speakers in just a bit, and looking forward to asking Charles a little bit more about some of those projects that he mentioned. Before I get there, though, I just want to turn it over to one of my colleagues here, Erica Young, who's the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Smart Growth America. And she's going to share a little bit more from the work that we've done with states and regions across the country and some of the trends in the ways that states are, and especially state transportation agencies, are changing the way that they operate to better meet some of these goals that Charles and Kate have also both talked about. Erica?
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Charles. Thanks, Kate, for those really great presentations. You guys obviously were quite flattering, and I always respond well to flattery. But really one of the things that, Dan, I really wanted to talk about was a lot of the work that we're doing here at Smart Growth America and within Smart Growth America at T4 and at the National Complete Streets Coalition, mainly because a lot of what we're seeing and hearing is a reflection of the type of work that SGA and T4 have done over the last couple of years, including the practical design work that Lynn started out in Washington, that we've actually been taking to about, I think, 5 or 6 different states at this point. We're in Hawaii right now. We're working with California. I believe we're about to work with Idaho. There's a number of states out west that have really latched onto this concept, Charles, of practical design and how do I get more out of my system knowing that we're not going to have, a ton more money come our way in the next year or two. How do I rethink some of those questions that we've been asking to really make sure that we're implementing things like multimodal design or applying return on investment analyses to different projects to see if they're really getting to the policy goals that our governors and our mayors and our city councilors and our county commissioners really want, to try and communicate what the value of these projects is to the larger communities, so that if we do in fact go back and ask for more money, we're not met with a slew of questions about where the money went in the first place or what the value is. So what T4 has been doing and what Smart Growth America has been doing, for example, here's a couple of different projects we've worked on recently. We've been working with the Florida Department of Transportation on delivering multimodal development and design options to try and implement their statewide complete streets mandate. What we've done really is focus in the Orlando area to basically rewrite their design guidelines to make sure that a lot of that work is integrated in there. We had a really great champion inside Florida DOT who's since left to go be the transportation director for the city of Orlando. Something happened in the last few months. But we're really excited that we're about to wrap that project up. And if I'm not mistaken, we're releasing a report on that specific project on February 6th or thereabouts. Keep your eyes open. I'm sure we'll be sending a blast out about when that gets released. But that's just another example of the type of work we've done. We've also, in Minnesota, done a return on investment study for the state's entire highway program just to figure out which assets are performing really well, which assets need perhaps more help and more strategy around them, need a better policy around them. That's on Smart Growth America's website. We did that just a couple of years ago. But then also a lot of the economic and fiscal analyses that we've done. The city of Indianapolis, pulling it down from the state level, the city of Indianapolis really worked with us to try and figure out the impact of the future growth around one of their proposed BRT systems. You guys obviously follow T4, so you've seen us talk a lot about the great work that the city of Indianapolis has done over the last handful of years, and part of that is building out their bus rapid transit network. We've been working with them hand in hand, whether it's on getting them spun up for their ballot initiative that was thankfully successful, working with them on understanding transportation performance measurements in both the policy and the project selection stage, but then also getting into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of fiscal analysis. I know that many people I've talked to over the last couple of months don't actually realize that we do that kind of work. I know that we have a lot of recognition as a policy shop, and most certainly we do still advocate for really these types of policies on the federal and state level that not only hopefully make you guys' lives easier, but also help put a little bit more coherence to the project. We also clearly put out some really high-quality reports. You have that report in front of you now about the different kinds of policies that states are enacting to really bring the system into the 21st century, really where that leadership is coming from. But then also we roll up our sleeves and really get into the nitty-gritty on how to do this financial analysis of different kinds of projects. I'm always happy to talk to anybody. I'll stop there, Dan, but happy to talk to anybody about the type of work we do, how we do it, what the opportunities are, and really just excited to be working on a lot of this front. Transportation's been sexier and more exciting the last couple of years, and it's been really my entire career. So this is kind of fun. But again, happy to talk to anybody about it. My information. Alicia is going to send my email out right now, so just feel free to drop me a line and we can connect on it. But with that, Dan, I'll turn it back over to you and hopefully answer any questions you might have.
Super. Thank you, Erica. And look forward to working with you all in some of this work. So we're going to go over to Q&A now. A few questions and comments. I just want to clear up one piece. We are recording the webinar, and we'll have this ready to share with you when we finish up. So we'll have that for you shortly. And I see some questions coming in. Keep them coming in through the chat box. I want to start you off maybe with sort of a foundational question about how to make some of these changes within an agency. So I guess especially for you, Charles, and for Kate, what can governors or administrative staff or DOT leadership do to really encourage innovation and also set strong expectations within a transportation agency, and set those expectations that the purpose of the transportation agency is really to advance some broader goals. What have you seen that's successful there?
Sure. Well, this is Charles. I can jump in with some initial thoughts on this. So really, I think leadership on that starts at the top, and it was for us to adopt practical design. It took a sea change. It was a cultural change. Not everybody was comfortable with it because I would say that one of the biggest barriers was that folks on the engineering staff were accustomed to doing things a certain way. They had been taught throughout their professional career to go to the textbook standards, and that was how you get projects done. On the political barrier, I would think that one of the biggest barriers was people had in mind how much a project should cost. They'd already kind of spent the money in their head, and they were in full lobbying mode in our state legislature to get that much money, and anything less than that was unacceptable. So trying to work with both of those groups took a lot of finesse, it took a lot of listening, and it also took some directives from our governor, from our secretary, that this is the new direction that we want to take the department. And so over time, it's been successful. There's been a lot more training within the department, and ultimately, I think our legislature came to the conclusion that this is a way we can do more projects that are better, that serve the community and actually meet our needs more, and so they were willing to adopt it really as their own policy.
So this is Kate. So I think I'll take this from a little bit of a different perspective, which is the kind of coordination among different agencies within state government. Something that's somewhat specific to New England. I know other places in the country are different, but in New England you have a really strong division between land use and growth control, which happens at the municipal level and is held onto very tightly at the municipal level, and then transportation investments, which by and large happen at the regional and state level. So we have this sort of long historical split between land use and transportation planning, which, as anyone can imagine, produces a mix of outcomes, and it can be somewhat difficult sometimes to predict or to exactly get the outcomes that you want. So for quite a few years now, we have tried different ways to better coordinate, at least at the state level, better coordinate within our cabinet secretariats how we think about things like housing development, how we think about things like stewarding environmental resources, how we decide where we invest in transportation infrastructure and other kinds of infrastructure. And at present, what we do, and actually we had a cabinet meeting this morning. Every 2 weeks, senior staff from our environmental, economic development, and transportation agencies get together, and we just have a big long list of things that overlap the different agencies, and we just kind of hammer them out and figure out who needs to be in the lead, and if there's an impediment somewhere, what's causing it, and how can we break it, and how can we resolve the kind of natural tensions between the things the economic folks want and the environmental folks want. And it's actually, it happens at a very sort of granular personal level, but it actually works pretty well. And it's incredibly important in a place like this where you've got pretty siloed topic areas, substance areas, and you need to find really conscious, active ways to bring them together.
Thanks. Another question that I've seen actually a few people ask this in different ways, and I think both of your states probably have some good lessons here. How do you sort of balance the needs across the geography of your state, especially the needs for different types of multimodal projects in different regions of the state?
I'm happy to take that one first. From Massachusetts, it is an ongoing challenge, I would say. It's something we think about all the time. It's something we deal with all the time. Massachusetts is a small state, but even given that, we have very different regions and very different communities with different types of needs for mobility as well as needs for housing and job growth and environmental protection, other kinds of things. And we are constantly aware of the fact that we need to not focus solely on the greater Boston area, that we need to find ways to meet the needs of people who live outside the range of our major transit agencies. And it's a challenge, particularly with increasing emphasis on things like greenhouse gas reduction, energy usage. What do you do in the parts of the state that have very low densities, where transit maybe is less likely to be successful, but you do need to be able to provide mobility options. And it is quite challenging, and it's actually something that came up and continues to come up with the project selection criteria that I talked about earlier, because once you start to dive into developing a project selection criteria system, you realize pretty quickly that it probably isn't prudent or fair to measure all projects in different circumstances around the state against the same metrics. But then you sort of are faced with having to create multiple sets of metrics for multiple different places. And then to some extent, are you undermining the original idea of having a single objective system? So I don't know how folks in California do it, because we struggle with it here on our very small state. But it is a very real challenge, I think, for people who are trying to figure out good transportation policy and good equity policies.
Yeah, I totally agree. The challenge is significant, and it's a great question. I think it applies to a lot of states that have both urban centers and rural areas that they need to think about the entire state's needs. In Washington State, we're having explosive growth in our metropolitan regions. In the Seattle area, just in the last year, I think the tally was 7 new people per hour coming into the region. So there's a strong need for robust transit and multimodal choices and options. We have the largest ferry system in the country is in that same area in the Puget Sound. And so those are very expensive and very significant needs for a specific region that might not apply to the rest of the state. We tried to make some broader arguments that there's connections between all parts of the state, particularly our agricultural areas and their need to get from their goods and products from farm to market and to our ports, which are in that metropolitan area. So there's a reason why people in Eastern Washington should care about the system in the Puget Sound and vice versa. Beyond that, we also provided local options that, in a sense, without balkanizing the state, it allows some of these jurisdictions a little bit more freedom to decide their own destiny, perhaps raise their own taxes, whether through it's a ballot measure or through their councilmanic action. So we try to provide more tools in that toolbox to adjust to the needs of different parts of the state, while retaining an overall vision of what our transportation system should look like and how all these pieces operate together.
Thanks. Let me follow up, I guess especially, Kate, where you left off, because there was another related question that I think is a good one. Which is when you're talking about sort of setting broad goals and measures for the state. Well, one of the questioners commented on that. There's a challenge in selling that idea that the local governments tend to think that they have a good idea of what their local priorities will be, and oftentimes might prefer a system where they come up with their own list of projects, and that's what the state comes in and funds. You mentioned in your initial comments that part of what's happening is that MassDOT is moving from thinking of itself as just sort of delivering a series of projects to sort of working on broader goals. What has your experience there been in sort of how to talk with other levels of government about sort of what that change in purpose is, and has that been a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I would say to some extent it is still a work in progress. In terms of our metropolitan planning organizations, we are, I think, unusual in that every square inch of Massachusetts is incorporated into an MPO area, even the ones that don't qualify by population standards. We chose to make them into MPOs. So we have probably for 10 years or more now been working with our MPOs and gradually moving everybody towards some kind of project selection criteria. Many of them are still qualitative if the data are not available to allow them to be quantitative. But each year they get a little bit better, and I think we have at different times taken a more and less strong stance as the state, saying we have policy goals and we want to see the MPO projects reflect those goals. And that's a discussion, a negotiation, but it is complicated because we have sort of three distinct types of projects here. We have the projects that MassDOT itself generates and executes, and those tend to be kind of the maintenance of our infrastructure. Everything from simple stuff like replacing guardrails or replacing signs, everything up to like giant interchange replacements and those kinds of things. So those are kind of our projects. Although obviously we're a small place and there's a lot of integration with municipalities and regions. Then there are the projects that come through the 3C and the MPO process, and then there are actually projects that are generated up by municipalities. And each of those sort of follows a somewhat separate journey to get to implementation. And it is a negotiation at each level, and I think the place probably where there's still the most work to do is the state to municipality. We're pretty well connected to the regions and the MPOs, but less so to the municipalities. So trying to figure out how do you filter down state-level strategic goals for the system as a whole to municipalities, and or are municipalities going to be particularly keen to necessarily just adopt those or see how they filter into their own, their own thinking about their own economic growth or their open space or whatever. One of the places where we see this probably most dramatically is with complete streets and bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, that we now have a state-level requirement that every street that's constructed or reconstructed in the Commonwealth needs to include full bicycle and pedestrian accommodation. But, in the real world, you run into things where there's not enough space or there's, some other inhibition in the road or something, and then it very much becomes a negotiation, and you say, the state has a commitment to full multimodal accommodation, and the town might say, like, well, no one's ridden a bike here in 50 years, so, and then you have to kind of work that through. So it's a process, I would say, but we're getting there.
Yeah, this is Charles. I'll chime in with a couple of thoughts here. This is a challenge. I think a lot of states probably face this, just the ongoing relationships that are important in order to make a system work. And we had, I'm sure like a lot of others, some past culture that probably was not all that productive, and I think there were trust gaps, and that was something that was required overcoming that and showing a new style, a new approach, and some of that is leadership style and personality, and some of it's just being good partners, being at the table, and showing a different side of state government that's less a perception of being domineering or paternalistic even in the way in which projects are approached. So we have been very, very, very specific in the language we use when working with our local jurisdictions about their plan as our plan, that we have adopted the MPO plans in particular as the state's plan going forward, and really are integrating that more and more into the way in which we do business. That goes for cities and counties as well. I think counties are sometimes squeezed in between, right? They don't have quite as much ability to pull levers, and they're getting less and less money. So there's that sandwiching effect, and we're really trying to make sure that for those local jurisdictions that we're doing right by them. And one of the ways that was hard, but something that we did just this last summer was with the FAST Act dollars that have come through. We've changed the split, so less money is going to the state and more to local jurisdictions. And that was something that we were able to do on a bipartisan level with our legislative leadership as well. It meant taking a hit to our own state budget on some level, but it was the right thing to do, and it helps solidify those partnerships with the locals.
Thanks. Going to switch gears a little bit, and this is, I think, a great question coming in. One of the sort of emerging challenges, I think, for all departments of transportation is sort of the big change coming with automated vehicles and some of the associated technologies. I know actually both of your states have really been leaders in working on automated vehicles and especially sort of thinking about the policy and how to incorporate this new technology into the transportation system. Could you talk maybe a little bit about what your states are doing on that front?
Sure, this is Kate. I'm happy to start. So I would say about a year ago, we really started focusing in on the AV issue. And I think that probably makes us sort of among the second wave of states to come to the issue. And we were somewhat pushed in it by the city of Boston, one of our closest partners and colleagues here, which had formed a relationship with the World Economic Forum and were actively soliciting for companies that were interested in testing automated vehicles. So over the course of several months, we developed a process by which entities that were interested in testing vehicles could apply to the state for permission to do so. We prefer it if they come to us in partnership with the municipalities, so they've already kind of worked out a testing plan together. Right now we have one company called Nutonomy, which is actually a Massachusetts company, testing in the city of Boston in a kind of industrial part of the city where there isn't as much urban traffic as you find in some other areas. And they have been out there for a couple weeks, I think. And we've already got inquiries from other companies coming. So I think we are very excited about it. We are trying to learn and keep up in real time, which is quite challenging. Our governor did issue an executive order related to kind of how we were thinking about automated vehicles in the immediate term. We felt pretty strongly that it was premature to either go for legislation or regulation, just given how fluid the field was and how quickly things seem to be moving. And I think everything we've seen since then has borne out the prudence of that choice. In terms of planning, we have people come to us and say, I want to build my development or my hotel or whatever, and in 20 years no one's going to have cars anymore, so do I really have to build all this parking, or can we do this or whatever? Can we have hangars for our floating pods? And we're not there yet. We're not ready to make significant changes to our planning assumptions to accommodate a huge change in mode. I think maybe because we're Yankees here in New England, we tend to be more incrementalists. But we're certainly keeping our eyes on it and seeing what's happening in real time and trying to figure out what we should be doing about it. It's not easy.
So, this is Charles. I think Washington State has taken some similar approach to what Kate just mentioned about Massachusetts and their thinking on this. Yeah, I guess if Massachusetts has the Yankee spirit, we've got sort of an independent Wild West streak out here, and if we didn't have the Pacific Ocean, we'd keep going west. So there's a strong interest here in early adoption of technology and acceptance of some uncertainty about innovation and even risk associated with that, and that's allowed us not just within state government and civic leadership, but with our population as well. And that's allowed us to experiment some. We've worked hard to recruit some key companies. Probably the most signature would be Google, and which is now operating under Waymo, and they've been doing testing for about a year now in one of our cities, and it's been going quite well. Our approach to this is there's a lot of upside to encouraging, cultivating, nurturing this technology, and not trying to put it in a box too soon. The technology is accelerating so fast that it'd almost be a hopeless task to try to regulate it at this point. And so we've tried to carve out that space for innovation and be open arms, put out the red carpet. The upside to this we see is great. I think the statistic is 33,000 fatalities a year on American roads due to traffic fatalities. That's and 94% of that is because of human error. It's not road conditions. It's not weather. So if there's a way in which we can reduce some of that that variable, we could save a lot of lives, save a lot of time, of course, that's spent in traffic, increase mobility for youth, the elderly, the disabled. And for us, a key component of this is also we see it as a major tool in climate change and tackling that issue. Our energy source in Washington State is primarily hydroelectric. We're a great candidate for use of electric vehicles. And the more there's a convergence of technology around autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicles, we think that can really increase operational efficiency in the system. And maybe we don't have to build the Taj Mahal interchange. We don't have to build lanes that are 12 feet wide. They can be 10 feet wide. Maybe there's less need for parking lots, and we can put parks there instead. So we're choosing to find to work towards that utopian vision as opposed to dystopian scenarios here. But it's so early in the game. We feel that's the best approach, and our governor is very passionate about this. In fact, just on Monday, he took a semi-autonomous vehicle test drive, and it's something that he feels personally passionate about. So we're going to stick with it.
This is Kate. Can I jump back in for a quick second?
Go for it.
So it's very interesting because we're wrestling with, it sounds like, really similar issues, and I think we are a shade more on the side of being cautious. We want to embrace innovation. We want to welcome it. Obviously, we have MIT and Harvard and universities here that are really well positioned in this field, and we also have a big robotics industry which we want to support. But we also have some genuine concerns about, somebody putting something on our roads that we don't have control over or don't have regulations that speak to very well. So we're walking two lines. We're sort of simultaneously opening up the door and asking folks to come in and be interested in testing and talk to us and figure it out, and then we're simultaneously kind of thinking about what regulations do we have that would speak to a problem if it arose. And it's one of the things for us, I don't know about Washington, but most of our motor vehicle regulations are decades old at this point. They certainly contemplate nothing like this. So we're going to have to do some work there to bring those up to speed.
Thank you. Yeah, this is certainly an area that we are watching closely and are interested to see how states continue to adapt. We have reached the end of our hour, unfortunately, and I want to send a big virtual round of applause to our two speakers today for all the work that they're doing and for joining us and sharing some of these ideas today. Thanks to all of you for joining as well and for sending in some really great questions. Didn't get to quite all of them, and so I'll be happy to follow up and hopefully can give you some more ideas. But I do want to remind you that there are some great answers to some of your questions in some of the resources we put out in the Governor's Briefing book that we just put out along with this webinar, as well as some of the earlier materials that we put out under our State Transportation Advocacy Research and Training Network. You can find all of that on our site, t4america.org. Again, we'll be sharing a recording of this presentation, and if you have any more questions, send them my way. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.